2014, Colombia's population numbered 46,245,297 people. Also, 90% of the population identifies as Roman Catholic, with the other 10% identifying with other religions. Mestizos make up the largest ethnic group at 58%, followed by whites at 20% and mulattoes at 14%. In 1810, Colombia's two major political parties were created, the Liberals and the Conservatives. On July 20, 1810, an uprising of citizens in Bogotá overthrew the Spanish officials who occupied the capital. This day is considered to be Colombia's Independence Day because it was the first step in the War for Independence. Full liberation wasn't achieved until 9 years later in 1819 at the Battle of Boyacá under the leadership of Simón Bolívar. After this liberation, the country of Gran Colombia was created and included the territories of present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. By 1830, Venezuela and Ecuador became independent nations, and Gran Colombia dissolved. The remaining territory of Colombia and Panama were renamed New Granada. In 1850, a series of reforms were enacted by the Liberal Party to strengthen the positions of the elite class and keep the peasants in poverty. New Granada received a name change in the Constitution of 1858 to the Granadine Confederation. The Constitution of 1863 once again renamed the nation to the United States of Colombia and promised freedom of education, expression, and religion, among other rights. More than 20 years later, the Constitution of 1886 was created and brought the country under a strong centralized system. It remained in effect until 1991 and also renamed the country the Republic of Colombia. The War of 1,000 Days began in July 1899 and was an attempted revolution by the Liberals. Once it was over in 1902, more than 100,000 people had died, and the entire country was completely devastated. In 1903, the Colombian Congress rejected the United States' offer to build a canal across the Panama Isthmus. The Panamanians were angry about this decision, so they revolted and seceded the same year. A decade later, in 1914, Colombia officially recognized Panama as independent, provided that it received rights in the canal zone and payment from the U.S. Between 1934 and 1938, a series of reforms called the Revolution on the March were enacted. An important social reform in this series guaranteed rights to squatters on public and private lands against landowners who had not been using it efficiently. The assassination of Jorge Eliezer Gaitán in 1948 initiated an era of violence called La Violencia between social and political groups. In 1957, the Declaration of Siques was created to ensure an alternation between conservatives and liberals in the presidency for the next 16 years. In 1961, the Colombian Institute for Agrarian Reform was created to address the inequalities of rural Colombians. In 1964, Marxist guerrilla groups such as the National Liberation Army, ELN, the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, FARC, and the 19th of April movement, M19, became more appealing to common civilians. In the late 1970s and into the 80s, guerrilla groups and drug traffickers committed various crimes against the Colombian government that showed their power and proved the government's inability to control terrorist activities. Paramilitary groups were formed by landowners in the 1980s to defend themselves against the guerrilla groups. Oddly enough, the government encouraged the formation of these paramilitary groups, and the Colombian army actually helped equip and train them. In 1989, the drug cartels began using terror to further their political agendas in the government. This caused homicide to become the leading cause of death in the country and violence rates to be higher than any year of La Violencia. The violence continued into the 1990 presidential elections when 3 candidates were murdered by drug traffickers as revenge for harsher drug trade policies. The Constitution of 1991 was characterized by unsuccessful negotiations with FARC and ELN. At this time, drug cartel leaders were the chief danger to social and political stability in Colombia. As of December 2014, FARC began a unilateral ceasefire, and the current president of Colombia initiated a negotiation meeting in Havana to discuss a bilateral ceasefire.